guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I don't even know why I'm excited, because I'm about to talk about a topic. The light, literally, Storm Eunice is you know, I don't know what she's doing, but she's doing some stuff, and the light is dripping in and out. But honestly, I'm just like, it's fine, it is what it is. You can see me, I can't see you, but you can see me. I don't know why I sound excited, because I'm about to talk about a topic that people might consider a little bit sad. So as a little bit of a guide, I'm going to be using Notes on Grief by Chimamanda and Ngozi Adichie. I was supposed to write down, I read this whole book in one sitting. It's not really much of a book, right? It's really tiny. It feels more like a pamphlet. It does have a generally good feel. It has like 20 something chapters, but like some chapters are literally one page. Like this is a chapter that started here, and the next page is another chapter. So like it's a really short book. Not much is going on here, but I'm gonna give you like a little bit of background of her story, and maybe a little bit of mine as well. Not a lot that I can actually give or actually want to, but just a little bit, right? Chimamanda lost her dad in 2020, and a year after she lost her dad, she lost her mom on her dad's birthday. And I remember when I heard this story, like I literally, my heart like went out to her, because I can fully relate to how she was feeling. I lost my dad as well. My dad's funeral was last year. Yeah, I was actually supposed to do this video on my dad's funeral, so like remembrance, like 1 year, which was the 29th of January. But I somehow decided that day, I'm a bit of a person that I have a lot of things with dates. Like sometimes dates, I remember them, they're really important to me. So I literally, that day I didn't do much. I just chilled, I watched some movies, just had like a really chill day. And I think that as a way to sort of like commemorate my dad's sort of like remembrance for myself, I want to do that more and more, like going forward, like maybe like watch some things that I think that he liked. So yeah, like I'm just trying to make it a whole thing, because I'm just you know, I like my dates, okay? So yeah, this was yeah, as I said, it was very heartbreaking. And for me, grief was such an interesting process because of the nature surrounding my father's death, which I, you know, also cannot really be bothered to get into. It was such a very complicated time, a lot of complicated things. And my dad suffered from stroke for quite a few years before he passed. So what that meant is that my dad's death was slow, painful. Obviously I wasn't in this situation, but it was slow and painful. He lost a lot of weight. He was like a ghost of himself literally before he passed. And so yeah, like that was really difficult. And I think sometimes I think of that like having a fast versus quick death. And is that way to say that? I don't know. This video is about death and grief, so you're just gonna have to bear with me. But have like a fast versus a slow, like I always wonder like what the difference is. But I think I've experienced that. Like I remember when my grandma died, she was sick, and like all of a sudden it was like, yeah, she's gone. It was a couple of weeks. And then having my dad's situation, which was more like years. I don't know, I think they're different. I don't think any of them is better per se. Slow grief versus quick grief, if that makes sense. Not that grief is ever quick, but if you get what I mean, in terms of like the situation and like when it happens and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think it's just very different. Another thing that I think about actually quite a lot is, say for example, like Chimamanda was very close to her dad. Like they were pretty much like best friends. I don't know, not best friends, but they were very close. And whereas I didn't have the best relationship with my dad until he passed, I was just thinking actually maybe like together I probably knew my dad for about 16 years. Not probably, I did only know my dad for 16 years before he had to move away because he was sick and some other stuff, and I moved to the UK as well when I was 16. So actually today is my 9-year anniversary of being in the UK. Pop. Okay, whatever, that was a weird sound. But anyway, so I was just thinking of that, like I only knew my dad for such a short time, right? So from 0 to 16, at least from 5-6 up to 5-6, I don't really remember any of that, and that's 10 years. I went to boarding school for a few years, so I literally only knew my dad for like a very short amount of time. And I think that's something that I only realized like after he passed, that oh, like I'm gonna, if I'm lucky to be alive for a long time, I'll probably know my dad longer than know him dead longer than I knew him alive. So that's also something to sort of wrestle with. Chimamanda in this book also talked about how people say her dad was like in his 80s, and people say like, oh yeah, but like he was in his 80s, love, like, you know, you've had a lot of time with him. But I don't think that makes it easier. I think it still hurts. I can't say that it will hurt any less or any more. I think also like the longer time that you spend with someone, the more, and if you have a good relationship with them, like the more like, you know, you want them to just be with you forever, and the more like it's I don't know. But yeah, it's quite interesting that there's so many different ways that people can lose someone. And I, you know, for example, for me, like, you know, because I didn't have a great relationship with my dad when I was around him, like it wasn't always the best. I used to be my dad's like little girl when I was like up to like a certain age. Like he was my best friend in my head, and yeah, it got to a point where things got a little bit rocky. But yeah, you would think that also then when I lost my dad, that it wouldn't, I actually thought that it wouldn't affect me as much as it did, but boy, if I speak. And so yeah, I'm just gonna go through this book. This video might be a bit longer than, you know, it might need to be. I think she talks about here, like she said, grief is a cruel kind of education. You learn how ungentle mourning can be, how full of anger. I think people say that, like, obviously the cycle of grief includes anger. I think I had things to be angry about, but it wasn't the whole like it wasn't about the actual grief. It wasn't actually about like the actual grief itself. It was things that were surrounding what happened to my dad, right? That was what I was angry about. I wasn't angry about him dying, if you get what I mean. I don't think I did anyway. So yeah, I don't think anger was a feeling that I experienced during the whole process of grieving. I just was just sad and a little bit numb, if I'm gonna be honest. But yeah, it's like people experience physically, and the emotions of grief, that's one thing I want to talk about, is that people experience it so differently. I know that between all my siblings, we've all experienced grief very differently. For example, like on my dad's funeral, I didn't shed a tear. I literally was trying to force it. Isn't that ridiculous? I was fully trying to force myself to cry at my dad's funeral. I'm a bit embarrassed to say that, but I really was. It doesn't mean that I wasn't sad. It's just like, I know that I have a way of like mentally like compartmentalizing different things in my life. And at that moment, I had a job to do. I was here to bury my father and to be present at my dad's funeral and to do the best that I can do whilst I was there, and then get the hell out. But then like I couldn't bring myself to feel that emotion. And I think in some ways, like, I know that I don't know what it means to deal with someone's death properly. In some ways I feel like I haven't, because I don't know, I don't really know, because in my mind, like, my dad is still somewhere. I didn't see my dad for like literally years before he passed, so in my mind he's still like somewhere, you know, in a house in Port Harcourt, around Rumaholo, and he's probably going to fight somebody because they upset him about something, and he's probably going to lay some tiles in some new flat that he's boarded up or whatever. So yeah, I don't think that I've come to terms with it in that way. Like, it's not like a settling feeling like, oh, he's dead. Like, it's in my body. It's weird anyway, but yeah, that's one thing. And I don't know if that's a bad thing or a good thing, but it's just more or less a thing. I watched a video as well where she was like, people say when you lose someone, right, people always like, yeah, like, oh, life is so short and you just want to like just, you know, take life slowly or do the things that you're meant to do. Whereas she was like, actually no, like, this is what is the point of all of this? And I think that was what I had, right? In this point is where she was like, my father is gone, my madness will now bear itself. And that is such a Nigerian statement, like, we are all mad now. So yeah, I feel like I definitely can relate to that. I think in some aspects of my life, I feel like I'm like, listen, I could drop dead tomorrow, right? So I'm going to go after the things and feel the things in my heart that I think I want to feel. Whereas in some of the aspects, I'm just like, what is the point of all of this again? I think I definitely went through that very strongly. Life can get very difficult. And it's just like, well, what is the point? Like, remind me. Like, I definitely genuinely have, and in some sense, like, still genuinely continue to struggle. What is the point? You know, we just kind of just die after everything. Everything that you work hard for. And my dad is like just round about retirement age. Not like he had a regular like white collar job, so he had a pension, nothing, but still, like, he was in his 60s when he died, like really early 60. So yeah, I think I definitely went more of like, actually what is going on. And I think that is one thing that I actually want to talk about, because I went through like a very deep like philosophical like moment in my mind, and this is a whole Christian moment coming up. I'm really sorry, but I don't know how everyone else deals with the concept of death. And for me, I lost my grandma. I think the biggest death before my dad was my grandma, and that was incredibly difficult for me, actually. I don't know how it affected other people, and I feel like to this day some of my siblings are surprised that my grandma's death affected me as much as it did, but it really did. And I didn't think that I knew anyway that I loved my grandma as much as I did, because people, for example, that I went to boarding school with will know that I always talk about her and her big ears, and how like when I think of my ears, like it reminds me of her, because she was just such a gentle spirit. Oh my god, we're not gonna cry in this video, that's not what it's about. But she was such a gentle spirit, she was such a kind woman, and a lot of things that I would like to embody, and she was just so kind that we just wanted her to just at some point like live like in community with us. Like I didn't speak Igbo, she didn't speak English, and till today, like that's why I'm so adamant about like trying to learn how to speak Igbo, because I'm just like, oh my god, I can't believe that I had such a short moment with her, and none of that, we didn't have any conversations about anything because we didn't understand each other, right? How did I get to that point? Anyway, I've never had to deal with the concept of death as much as I did when I lost my dad, but I had to go through a moment where I really like actually deep like what is life. And for me, like going through that perspective from a Christian lens led me to the point where I was just like, death as it is, and our sort of like this separation from ourselves is not what life was supposed to be like. It's not what God intended for us, I believe, and I believe it's what Christians believe as well. Jackie Hill Perry, who I also love as well, she wrote a tweet once and she was like, death is weird, and it feels really awkward because we were never meant to be separated from each other. Because you know, you're just one moment, you're just here, you know, talking, clothes, everything, you know, dancing, singing, whatever, and the next moment it's just like you're just gone, and nothing can stop that from happening. So that was it really messed up with my mind. Also because I prayed a lot for my dad, you know, like when he was sick, and yeah, like, so that really just messed me up, where I was just like, I don't, you know. So yeah, I think that was what really helped me. It's like we were never meant to die, and God didn't create death in like death came into this world through our choices. And when I look at my life and I look at our lives and I look at the world, and I'm just like, we make those same choices every single day. So there's literally it's like deeply philosophical, where I was just like, we were never meant to die, so it's okay that this feeling that I'm feeling feels unnatural, and it comes with a certain amount of pain, because we were never really meant to experience this level of pain, right? So yeah, I don't know how people who are, you know, maybe of other faiths or people who are not Christian, I don't know how they deal with that, but that was the way that I dealt with mine. And I don't think I've explained it properly, but yeah, I had to just go through that entire cycle of life, of how we, not just life with myself, but like from the beginning of time, how God created the world, which I believe in. And yeah, that really helped me. And I do understand that might not help everybody, and it might sound like a load of BS to other people, but it's fine. And that is my also vibes with everything to do with faith. I'm like, listen, if it's BS to you, that's fine, but it saved my life, so there we go. So another one that I really wanted to talk about is people's reaction to you losing somebody. So here she said, I back away from condolences. People are kind, people mean well, but knowing this does not make their words rankle any less. Demise, a favorite of Nigerians, it conjures for me dark distortions. On the demise of your father. I detest demise. His resting brings comfort, but a scoff that trails its way back to pain. I literally had someone, when they heard that my dad died, right? They called me, and literally I was going into somewhere, they called me, and I had to stand outside for a bit, obviously, because where I was going in, I couldn't have my phone with me. And then they were like, yeah, this is literally the conversation. They were like, hello? I was like, hi. Obviously knowing that was the reason they're calling me. They were like, I heard. I was like, yeah. And then he went, sorry, oh, like the Nigerian way, like, is that sorry or something like that? I'm not sure he said sorry actually. And then he literally just moved on to something else. Literally. Why did you call me? I would have been happy with just a text. Like, listen, if you're not gonna, just leave me alone. So I think she really talked about that like a lot, and I think this is something that people talk about a lot when they grieve. It's like your world feels like it stopped, but everyone else just keeps going on, right? And I think never did I understand so much more about mental health as I did when I lost my dad. I understood what it was like to live with a certain level of anxiety in your heart. I just understood so much. I understood how easy it was to put like a smile on your face, right, and be outside and nobody really knows what's happening inside of you. I understood what it was like for people to commend you so much on how strong you are, whereas, you know, you're actually falling apart. I understood so much, like, to do with mental health when my dad died, because I think for the first time as an adult, like, really just experiencing that, oh, literally my world felt like it had stopped, but everyone else still kept moving on. So that was difficult. So yeah, I'm really happy that she talked about that, because people can be very, I don't know, just very interesting in the way that they interact with people who are dealing with loss. Yeah, I don't know. I think I also have different opinions with her on this one, because she went on to say, years ago somebody died and a relative said with certainty, the wife can't be alone. And I thought, but what if she wants to be? There is value in that Igbo way, that African way of grappling with grief. The performative, expressive, outward mourning, where you take every call, you tell and retell the story of what happened. Where isolation is anathema, this is a big word that I don't know, and stop crying, a refrain. But I'm not ready. I talk only to my closest family. It is instinctive, my recoiling. I imagine the confusion of some relatives, their disapproval even when faced with my withdrawal, the calls I leave unanswered, the messages unread. They might think it is a mystifying self-indulgence or an affection of fame, or both. In truth, at first, it is a protective stance, a shrieking from further pain because I am drained limp from crying, and to speak about it would be to cry again. But later, it is because I want to sit alone with my grief. I want to protect, hide from these foreign sensations, these bewildering series of hills and valleys. So I think what she's talking about here is that in Igbo, like, I can't speak for Africa, obviously. In Igbo society, like, when someone dies, like, literally the entire village is coming to your house. Yeah, they're gonna be there. They're not moving. Everyone is there. I think grief is weird in that way, that people differ in how they want to receive love when they grieve. And I think I'm probably more of, I don't necessarily want to be alone, because again, I just struggle with the concept of being alone per se. I feel like I've adjusted to it because I have to. Like, I like being alone. I like being not by myself, but I like having my own space within a community, if that makes sense. So I think that, you know, in that case, I don't know how people who have dealt with the outwardness of grieving, right? Like, when I went to my dad's funeral, I knew that I was there for people, and people dragging for food, you know, the normal things at a funeral and all the fights and things that happen. But I didn't necessarily take that personally. Someone telling me stop crying, I mean, they couldn't because I wasn't crying. But yeah, it's just what they say, and I'm not ashamed to bear my grief outwardly if I have to, and if I can't. I remember when I lost my grandma, I didn't even care. I was crying like, oof. Listen, think of like the movie you've seen where someone was crying and you see the cry and like, oh, I was crying so badly, and I didn't care about literally anybody. Like, yeah, she dead, I will cry. So I didn't mind that, and I don't mind that. I don't mind crying in front of people. I don't mind people telling me, oh, stop crying. I don't mind people being in my space. But if say for example, I have a big house or I have a house and people around, I'm happy for them to know that, okay, I'm gonna go to my room and I'm going to sleep, or I'm going to just sit there by myself and be crying. But I want to know that when I come out, that there's people there. And also, sometimes people also say that you never really know what to do when someone's grieving, but I don't know. I feel like that's not something that's peculiar to grief. I think when everything in life, you never know what anyone's going to deal with anything. Celebrations, like I was talking about birthdays, for example, I think it was my sister's actually. And the way I deal with my birthday is so different to the way other people celebrate their birthdays. I remember my friend actually who lost her mom, and we sort of like give each other like a little bit of comfort, like when I lost my dad as well, and I mentioned to her like, yeah, I lost my dad and stuff like that. And she was saying how different she is to her husband, right? Her husband is, you know, he lost his dad and she lost her mom, right? And she's on about it all the time. She's like, you know, yeah, like the way I lost my mom's affecting me in this way. And he's like, zip, nothing. He's not mentioned anything. He's not talking about anything, nothing at all. He's just like silent as a bee. He never brings up his dad, never talks about it. So like they're two people who are married, living in the same house, and they have two complete opposite like ways of dealing with grief. And she also told me how sometimes like she felt like she was banging on about it all the time because she always used to bring up her mom, and he was just completely silent. So I don't know, it's very interesting. And I don't know. I don't know why it's different. But then again, I'm not surprised because, like I said, people are very different. People are very different in life in general. And so we can't necessarily then put an excuse on grief to say, oh, because they're grieving differently, then I'm gonna like blanket and treat everyone the same. Because we never really do that with everything, right? The way that we grieve different people, even for ourselves, is different. The way that if you lose, you know, I remember, this might sound crazy, but trust me, listen. When my cat died, I'm still grieving my cat. My little cat Agu, when he died, I get emotional sometimes thinking about that cat. So I'm just like, what was wrong with me? In my mind, that cat was like my first ever pet. And I love that cat so honestly. It's really weird, trust me, it's very strange, but I love that cat so much. And so this also covers for people who have pets and who lose their pets, or things that are like almost not inanimate, but like every other person would find stupid. But yeah, it's grief is a very interesting thing. But I know that when you experience grief, like, and when you lose someone as well, like people's experience with grief is very different, right? In terms of like, depending on the person that's died, depending on how close you were to the person. But there's a certain type of grief that you will touch, and it's like, one thing that I think people need to consider is that you just, you know, I was just like, I don't want to be here. I don't know if I need to eat. I don't know if I need to sleep. I don't know if I need to put on my clothes. I don't really know. I don't want to be experiencing any of this. I don't want to be here. I don't want any of this. So someone then in that moment asking me, oh, what do you need? I need to not be here. I don't want to be doing any of this. Actually, if I had the option, I would rather not. So I think in that moment, I don't think that even thinking of all the people who I've lost, I don't think I've ever really sat down and thought, ooh, how am I feeling? It's not something that you're processing in that moment. You're not even thinking of if you need to eat, if you need to sleep, nothing. It's weird. I think that's maybe the perspective that I think we need to come from when we like look for, or like trying to like know how to respond to grief when someone else is grieving, is that nothing makes sense, and you're just a roller coaster of emotions. And maybe in hindsight, or maybe a few weeks down, then you can start to think, okay, how can I then process this grief? Of course, the way people grieve and even how they talk about their grief afterwards is another one. I think that the society that we live in at the moment emphasizes a lot of power or weight in talking about things, or talk about it. For me personally, talking doesn't do anything for me. Sometimes I hate talking about things, because I'm the kind of person, I even hate explaining things to people if I know that they won't understand. I like to be understood more than I want to be listened to. So a lot of times talking doesn't really do anything for me. But again, nobody should be afraid to mention it to me, right? Because, you know, someone brought up like that my dad died, doesn't mean that I'm like, wow, you just reminded me, I completely forgot. Do you know what I mean? But we also never do that with everything else. Like if I got let's think of something good, right? If I had a baby, I was telling my friends about this. We had like a really long conversation about this, and I was telling them that if I had a baby, which is like the opposite, the other spectrum of death, right? If I had a baby, I bet you people are going to be asking, how is your child doing, right? How are you coping, you know, being a parent, whether single parent, married, or whatever. If I got married, yeah, people would ask me, you know, how is your partner doing? How are you, you know, coping, being a wife? 1 year anniversary, wow, that's so good. Oh my god, how has 1 year of marriage been for you? And these are big moments: birth, death, and marriage, right? Divorce are big moments in life, and people will ask you how you're doing. But all of a sudden, when it comes to grief, we're always, or like more negative things like divorce or maybe grief, people are a bit more like, oh, I don't really know, like, you know, we're just like, oh, I'm not sure how she will take this, or how they'll take this, or how he'll take that. And I don't know, I feel like maybe it speaks to more of how uncomfortable we are with talking about negative things, or things that are considered to be negative. Because yeah, people will get offended about you not inviting them to like cool things, like cool things, right? Parties and weddings and all this kind of stuff. But nobody wants to go to a funeral. Nobody wants to be there and see the ugliness and be, you know, in the sadness. But I think, you know, it's something that I've been learning how to deal with, and I think it's something that people in general in life just struggle with, which is that life isn't always good, right? There's good and bad in life, and sometimes we don't really know how to handle the bad. Yeah, even now, having experienced loss in the way that I have, I'm not sure that I will really know how to be there for someone who does. So yeah, I don't know, I think it's tricky, but we would never not say anything about it. You would never not ask someone who's had a baby how they're coping with having a child, or how's the child doing. So yeah, I think that's one thing that we definitely need to improve on as a society. Okay, what else did I talk about? There's so many things in this book, even though it's such a small one. She talked about her dad quite a lot and very fondly. It was beautiful. You could tell, right, reading the book, I could tell that this book, she just wrote some things about someone who lost their dad, a man that they loved very much, and you just happened to stumble upon that information. She wasn't writing from our perspective. She literally didn't care about you and your feelings in this book. She's just like, I'm just saying this and you happen to be reading it, which I love. But there's something here that I wrote down, where she was saying how she needs time. She's like, for now I want openness. A friend sends me a line from a novel which says, grief was a celebration of love. Those who could feel real grief were lucky to have loved. How odd to find it so extremely painful to read my own words. So yeah, I think, I mean, from that really popular, what's that show again? Oh gosh, what's the one? The Marvel Disney one. What is grief but love persevering? Yeah, I don't know if grief makes up for the love, unfortunately. I'm sorry. I don't know if the love makes up for the grief. Yeah, I don't know. I definitely will say I'm not quite sure that it does, but yeah, it is what it is. You never stop grieving. You never stop grieving at all, and I can tell you this from experience. You just never do. I thought about something to my grandma the other day, and I just started tearing up. Why it's happened since when I was 15. I'm 25 now. It's been a long time, and even with my grandma, like I said, it's like the first time that I ever experienced grief, but that was such a different relationship. You never really stop grieving, and I think that's another thing. Chimamanda didn't talk about that in this book, but that's another thing people don't talk about. It's like, it's not something that ends. The same analogy that I use with a child, right? When you give birth, you know, you're gonna have different struggles with, you know, your child when they're growing up. You have the sleepless nights phase, and then you have the, you know, toothing phase, and then you have, you know, they're like 2 years old now and run over the place. Then they're 5, then they're 10, then you get teenagers, adolescents, all of that. Like, they're like completely different stages, and the amount of care and time that you need to put into a child's life when they're 1 year old and needing to change a nappy and eat all the time is not the same care that you put into your child when they're 25. So it's literally the exact same concept, but for some reason I think people really struggle to understand that. And I think there's a certain amount of abandonment that comes with grief as well, is that people just think that it's, I don't know, it's weird. People just think that it just ends, right? Okay, yeah, you know, it's been a year now, like, sort it out, babes. But people who've actually really lost somebody that they really love, like, I mean, not necessarily love, but say, like, somebody that was fundamental in their life will tell you that it's something that will never end, right? It talks about how you not only mourn the things that you did with them, like, it's like the things that you can't do, right? So whenever you go through milestones, right, you think about how they will never be there in that milestone, right? Everybody's gonna have, you know, their dad do certain things for them, or, you know, this person do certain things for them. Like, whenever I hear someone talk about their parents or their grandparents, or it's literally, especially like such a fundamental role in your life, you never stop grieving. You really never do. Another thing that I love about Chimamanda, this is why I really wanted to read this book, because Chimamanda has a way of relaying things inside my heart that I really don't necessarily know how to say. So she said, "My father's past is familiar to me because of stories told and retold. Yet I always intended to document them better, to record him speaking. I kept planning to and thinking we had time. 'We'll do it next time, Daddy,' I would say, and he would say, 'Okay, next time.' There is a sensation that is frightening, of a receding, of an ancestry sleeping away. But I am at least left with enough for myth, if not memory." And I remember when I lost my dad, I think about 6 months in, and other than the people who had told, I hadn't started talking about it to people outwardly that, "Oh, I lost my dad." And I went to like a show where one of the things that they were talking about in the show was legacy. And I remember just feeling like, oh my goodness, there is so much of my dad's life that I don't know. And there's so much of my family history that I want to know about. And these are sort of conversations that I would like to have with him now. And I would never be able to ask him those questions. And yeah, I think it's something that I don't know how, I think it's something that brings me sadness. Again, it might not be deep to a lot of people because it's like, oh my god, you know, yeah, whatever. But it's something that's really, really important to me, and to think that that's something that I would never have, yeah, it's something that's scary. But just in general, when you think of grief, like I said, I wouldn't know my dad for such a long time, is you don't just mourn the things that you had, you always also mourn the things that you can't have. Like I'll just think of something and I'm like, oh yeah, you know, I would never be able to do that. I would never have someone do that for me. I would never. And this is not, sometimes you can even also have this with people who their fathers are still alive and they're just, you know, somewhere, somehow not available. So yeah, I think that's a really difficult thing to sort of come to terms with. But yeah, the legacy part and knowing a bit more, because my dad was also such a history man, and he was definitely much into culture, and knowing just, yeah, sort of the things that I'm really curious about now, and really interesting to have those conversations with him and know what life was like for him as a boy, which he always used to say, but I was such a young person and I didn't really want to listen then, as you never do. But yeah, I definitely recommend that for people who are lucky enough to have their parents alive, definitely ask them about their life, you know, before they became a mom, a dad, a husband, a wife, or whatever it is, because they had so much, right, to show. And this is why I have a YouTube channel, so that if anybody cares, you know, 50 years from now, they can see what I thought about everything. But yeah, but that's the thing about grief. It's just like it's not just what you had, it's what you can't, and what you can't have, and what you will sort of continue to long for the rest of your life. It's unsettling, but it's life. I think also, maybe lastly, the scariest thing for me about grief was and is the realization that this isn't the last time that I'm gonna have to deal with this. Whew. Yeah, this is not the last time that someone that I know and love will die, which is just like, this is the ghetto. This is the ghetto. But yeah, I think I had like a bit of like fear, and I think a lot of people who have lost someone that they love will have a whole like panic of fear about it and not having to experience this feeling again, because it's such a terrible feeling. But I think the moment that hit me, it really hit me like, yo. Whew. But yeah, that's my notes on grief. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you somewhere in this space sometime soon. Bye.